It's very, very, very wonderful that you all made it out here. I didn't know what to expect on a snowy weekend in the Alps, and I really am amazed that and appreciate very much that you made it here. For me, Geneva is a very important place because I did live here for a short time. For many reasons. It was a turning point in my life also, the time I was living here, for good and for bad maybe. But and it's curious, maybe some of you know that Jorge Luis Borges is buried here. So that is also was important for me when I did come to Geneva. In a way, I always have in my mind this comparison Geneva-Zurich, and the train was my connection. And on that train, I wrote a lot of the texts that now we are working on and publishing. So I think maybe one day I will write that. I will do a lecture just on my Swiss experience. But today we're going to talk about scarcity, because we are the last generation that understands what's going on in the planet with resources. And we have the capacity now in this generation to turn it around. So therefore, we cannot help the next generation, because whatever we do will be too late for the next generation. So they will be excused from having to act. But when I was born, it was first photographs of the Earth were seen. It was a watery planet. It looked very beautiful, right? But today, this is an urbanized planet, super interconnected. You probably maybe have seen these images. But not only interconnected, it's a wonderful planet. We could say a very positive planet. But actually, at this very moment, there's more conflict around the globe than ever. Every year, we have increasing amount of conflict. And this is a little video of what I found when I left Columbia University to come and try and become an architect in Caracas, Venezuela. For those of you who might know, Caracas still continues to be under siege. It's in its worst moment you can imagine at this very time. So therefore, what I'm going to talk to you about today is what it means to become an architect in the developing world in time of conflict. What tools are you trained with at university today that can help you really become a good professional that could turn the kind of inequalities around? These are some of the newspaper ads that just came out from El País, how the violence is escalating in the streets, and we are becoming more and more militarized. And I will address this image in a second. But Americans have been watching protests against oppressive regimes that concentrate massive wealth in the hands of an elite few. Yet in our own democracy, 1% of the people take in nearly a quarter of the nation's income. And inequality, even the wealthy will come to regret. So therefore, it's no longer north and south, east and west. It is one globe. That was the purpose of showing you the planet. We have to reach out beyond our boundaries and start to function as professionals on a global scale and look at global problems, because these problems will be coming right back to us in one way or another. So we all know that Albert Einstein, as being the guy of the famous nuclear equation, inventing the atom bomb. But what we might not remember is that he's now more famous for what he did as the peace movement. And he had this idea, and he called Tagore in India, and he called intellectuals from around the world to create a group of individuals that could actually oversee peace and come to some principles on which the globe could function, right, as in a humane way. Well, in that same way, I believe that we have the opportunity now, as Geneva and as Switzerland in general has institutions that reach far beyond their borders, like the Red Cross, like FIFA, like UN here in Geneva, we should create a kind of superior body of individuals, of architects, of thinkers that would look at cities and the urbanized world, because it's in cities that the conflicts are being laid out. And it's in this spatial segregation of space, either on one side of the tracks or on the other, in the face of a weakened government, that all of these inequalities are happening. If we look at this, you'll see it's a little clip from our movies. All of the information I'm showing you is from our own film work, because we need to go to a more visual scale, get it on TV and media, or else we won't change the world.
Can architecture do it? I mean, that's the question we really have to ask. Are we just decorators now? I mean, are we just, is there just a band of sort of architects that go around trying to make everything look good?
Architects have been conventionally and traditionally been handmaidens of the client. And that's a very clear thing. I mean, and the clarity is because, you don't find any architect participating in the freedom struggle of India, for example.
As India is urbanizing, as Mumbai is urbanizing, Delhi, buildings are being done, slums are being completely erased.
Cities. Urbanism occurs without designers. Urbanism occurs without architects.
We have to find a new way to live in the city. We cannot think of these compact cities anymore. Then with green belts and rail lines and no cars and congestion charges. That's all fine for London. But for a maximum city, the mega cities of the South, that is not possible.
A lot of development, a huge proportion of development is not so much to build our cities or build the things that we really need, but they're part of generating money.
So if the market is not functioning correctly, then we have to mess with the market. You see, you thought that architecture was about building the object, about creating the facade. But actually, architects are one of the only professional disciplines that are very well trained to understand all the integrated arts and engineering and sciences. From earth sciences, geology, to earth studies, to topography, to visual arts, to economics, because we do work in that sector, understanding how much our buildings will cost, to the engineering and to the actual design work. So we might be one of the only professionals who can bring together all the disparate arms of people that are involved in developing cities. But the architect today, or the architect of the 1990s, was practically relegated to just developing one little piece of lot, of plot for one individual or one institution, and not thinking about the city at large and integrating. So if we now, and maybe Europe is pretty much done, we can just fill in a few holes, let's say, and North America pretty much done, filling in a few holes. But if we look at India, look what's happening on the strip between Bangalore Airport. What's happening is, there you see a sign saying Boca Villa in peace in serenity. This little urban village here that is an agricultural village will be erased because people have been buying up agricultural land, which is illegal around the airport and into the city, right? But of course, there's some politician. Did you know in Delhi, 70% of the delegates of the congressmen in Delhi are listed as real estate developers? There you go. And this is what happens. Luxuria, look at the signs. Water's Edge, Necklace Pride, Greenwich. You know, a life full of privilege awaits you. Who is India building this for? Homes that speak the good life, right? This is speculation. Pure speculation by many times major international banks along with real estate and construction firms, right? We gotta mess with the market. I'm not saying eliminate the market. I want to work with the market. I just want the market to change their mind. You know, how do you see it? Is the glass half full or half empty, right? But there are a lot of good things to learn from India, which is what we call Jugaad urbanism, right? You see it all over. People inventing the most incredible things, from bicycles to ice cream makers to milk things, to new ways to transport systems in the beach, right? There's a famous essay by V.S. Naipaul. Does anyone know the Nobel Prize writer? V.S. Naipaul? He's from Trinidad and Tobago. He won the Nobel Prize in Literature. He wrote many books, but The Enigma of the Arrival is kind of interesting. But V.S. Naipaul, because he was Indian immigrant to Trinidad and Tobago, Caribbean. He's part of the Creole culture, but then trained in Oxford, right? He has a very hybrid way of looking at the world. And he said he went back to India to look at the design schools. And he was horrified with the simulacrum, where Indian professors trained in the United States or in Europe go back to India to teach their students to design things that they saw in North America and in Europe. It's just crazy when it has no application possible. For instance, once he walked into the classroom and he saw the Indian students redesigning the bullock cart, for los bueyes, for the cattle through the city pulling merchandise, a little bit like this, not motorized. And he said it's absurd to change the wheels, to put new spokes, do new things. It would make the bullock cart already too expensive. And the bullock cart was already costing Indian families similar to what second and third hand cars cost in England, right? So to redesign it with other alloys and things is absurd. So there's an absurdity in the process. I'm going to take you through our values, the things that we've seen. Now, I didn't learn this because it just occurred to me. I learned this because I was living in the shithole. I was in the middle of Caracas thinking that I was going to build all the parametric facades and things that I designed at Columbia University. When I arrived, the reality hit me right in the face. So we became much more interested in movements like this pistoletto image here of arte povera. So we said, could we make a kind of low-tech, intelligent, critical architecture influenced by Taufuri and by the kind of arte povera movement, right? It doesn't mean the work is poor. No, it means that you use materiality and resources in a scarce way to make from minimum to maximum ideas. So I believe there's a loss of legitimacy in the role of the architect. And we're living in this time of crisis, which I told you, and it runs parallel, I think, in the arts and in all our collective consciousness. We don't really know what to do with ourselves. In fact, maybe that's why we have to go drink and have babies. I've never seen so many babies than in Switzerland. It's like a baby boom. So it raises in my mind, what are we bringing them to this world for? You know that in the next 30 years, there'll be about 2 billion new inhabitants on this world. We'll go from about 7 to 9 billion. Of those 2 billion, most of them will be in slums, will be in the global south. So what's the legitimate position of the architect? What's the legitimate position of teaching architecture if we have to get ready for that thing and we're not ready at all for that massive growth? Of course, there was an old idea that the Malthus paradigm, which in 100 years ago, more 150 years ago, Malthus predicted that the world population and food would be in an absolute crisis. There would be not enough food for the rising population. Well, in the 60s, 70s, 80s, people said, oh, that paradigm of Malthus is BS. Because we can now genetically create food. We can grow food in laboratories. Well, guess what? Now, no one wants to eat genetically manipulated food. So we've got a crisis. So here we are looking at my wonderful neighborhood in Zurich, and this is brand new. This is called New Oerlikon. This is Oerlikon, which was an industrial zone, and they turned it into a suburb of Zurich. And it's done by great architects. You see Peter Mackley here in front with the new school. It's absolutely dry blocks of absolute rational scientific planning, absolutely even absurd, so scientific that it gets absurd. Like they cross a road between a park, so they divide a park space with the bus going down. A little kid playing soccer is going to get killed. So this is our terrace where everything's happening, and what's the first thing we did? We started growing food on the terrace. Here you see the boxes for our summer hamburgers and barbecues and vegetables. I invite you all to visit us. Then we went and said, we're not going to be an ETH. We don't want to be in a sterile building of the science city up on Hunk on the hill. We want to experiment. We want to build things. We want to actually prototype things. So we were able, with a few other professors, to get an old industrial building, and we built our little theater and all of our classes, and everything happened in this industrial building in Oerlikon. It's kind of a school away from a school. And what did we decide after 3 years of thinking about it? What European city would we study? And which would be the basis of our research? It would be Athens. Of course, Athens, the one that's in the biggest crisis at the moment. So we created a project called Reactivate Athens, 101 ideas for Athens, 100 ideas, and the last one idea is the summary of all of them. And we want to see if we can kickstart a kind of brainstorm of ideas for Athens that would make Athens, like Detroit, declaring itself bankrupt, turn Athens into the prototype of the new thinking on European cities. Let's see if we can try. But the whole idea is a little bit like a Debord. Guy Debord, maybe some of you know, Guy Debord's thinking and writing. The idea is to return to tactics and strategies that would be emotional, that would actually glue us back together as individuals. Kind of a new kind of mapping of Athens is what we're doing, and you see that map back on the wall that now has been completely intervened, and we've created a center there to collect ideas. We have more than 6,000 ideas that have come from the general public. We're going to merge them into a new psychogram map of Athens that will kind of be a new derive through the city, of a kind of acupuncture in the city where these ideas could all gestate, happen like a laboratory. One of these maps I'll share with you is that all of these black buildings you see are empty buildings. What you might not know, that about 60% of the building stock in downtown Athens are empty, either government buildings or privately owned buildings. But not only the ones that are privately owned completely, but thousands of apartments in the center of the city are empty, used now as warehouses and boxes and things. But so we started to map also the prostitution, the drug zones, the concentration of homelessness, the food banks, and we're mapping all of those things on top of each other and looking for the acupuncture nodes in which we think we should intervene. So what do we learn? We have to understand why we do things. We have to interpret what to do. We have to figure out where to act. And we have to identify with whom to act. So going back to Caracas, this is a young Hubert, my partner, selling T-shirts. In 2001, we made a manifesto for Caracas. When we arrived, we were fed up. We could not believe what we saw. So the manifesto, and I'll translate, some of you don't know Spanish, el manifesto no. Why was the manifesto no? Was because we didn't agree with what was going on, right? Maybe today I might do a manifesto sí, where I do agree with what's going on, that something really has got to change. So we didn't come here to follow courses of diplomacy. We didn't come here to acquire a culture with comfortable personal ends. We came to confront ourselves with the urban problems, to call things by their name. We cannot maintain ourselves indifferent in the climate of falsehood that constitutes the cultural reality of Venezuela. Of course, that didn't make a few friends, right? We gained enemies with all the older generations of architects who had the work at that time in 2001. Now they've got no work, and now they're protesting. So the first thing we did was to go and map the city. 1966, 75, there was no convincing map of what was happening to Caracas. Everything you see in yellow is informal areas. 60% of the population of Caracas, maybe 55, 60%, lives on 40% of the territory in informal zones. So we zoomed in and we said, we're going to study this informal city. What does it mean? We later came to realize that almost 100% of Caracas is informal. Even the rich zones of Caracas are illegally adding on to their buildings, closing balconies, building floors that were not allowed. But what we tried to do now at ETH, after 15 years of being on the ground, bottom up, we were actually street vendor architects. We were actually working with the church, with the Anglican Church and the Don Bosco Church. You will see one of those works. But now at ETH, we've gone full circle. Amazingly and surprisingly, our lives have taken full circle. Now we're at the top institution in a top country, actually dealing now with the Inter-American Development Bank on a larger scale. So what we've learned is how to go from the street, from bottom up to top down. And we're learning how to bring these two things together. And we think the university is the place to incubate. The university, like Lefebvre said, would be the perfect place to create a university for the city, where we bring enterprise and we bring NGOs and we bring community leaders and we put them together with designers and scientists. Because, as Rainer Banham said, architecture is too important to be left to the architectural profession. So if we study the three time zones, we have kind of the 19th century city, the Haussmann plan, and you have the access and the allées and the urbanism that many of you know. And then we go to the 20th century city and we have, the suburban sprawl, and we have the tabula rasa, the erasure of complete quartiers, and we have the grid coming in, the modern city, the rational city coming in, of which highways and many things were actually discarded today as useful, and the car and the combustion city, etc. So a lot of those things were failures. But what we're interested in is in the third phase, which I would call kind of the heterotopia city, which is about micro spaces, informality, temporary, reprogramming the existing. I'm not a big fan on building too many new buildings, only if you really, really need them. But I'm a fan of densifying what we already have and building on top of the old city. So the ETH model is really to work and bridge these gaps, top down, bottom up, across the world, with our Singapore lab, our friends in the United States, which I still remain very close to Columbia University, and we are applying this idea in Latin America. Why Latin America? Not only because I come there, but Latin America has something to teach us. Latin America is 89, the cities in Latin America are 89% urbanized. Most of them, Caracas particularly. Whereas China is maybe 35-40% urbanized, Europe might be 70% urbanized, etc. United States might be 60% urbanized. Latin America is 80% urbanized. Most people in Latin America live in cities. That's why they're so big. Sao Paulo, Caracas, growing exponentially. Lima, Bogota. So that's why some of the new inventions for people living on top of each other, hyper-urban density, are coming from Latin America. For instance, urban cable cars, for instance, transmillennium bus systems that are cheaper devices than the traditional infrastructure ideas. It's hybrid models. Yes, so this one just shows you that we want to, traditionally we only work with those three in the architectural community. We work with engineering, environment, and architecture, but we want to work with all the other sciences in the university. We want to look for a model that is a kind of mutual and ever-changing interaction between subject people, we're building architecture for people, and object architecture structure. We want the dialogue. So the South is our North. What we're saying, let's learn from the South, because the North has already imported everything and selling all these obsolete, outdated technologies that they no longer use in Europe, they still sell to the Latin American and to the global South. Old refrigerators, old cars, combustion cars, highways. They're promoting the construction of highways all over the global South, when they don't do that here. So this is an interesting map that just shows this fictitious line across the top. This is what we call the political equator. It's actually a term coined by Teddy Cruz, my good friend from Tijuana. I actually was going to show you one of our movies where we went to Tijuana with Teddy very early on to study that border between the richest and the poorest border in the world. We've gone pretty much all over, and all of these red dots that you see is a deformed map is the projection of the world population in 30 years, where it will be concentrated. If we don't do something, this is what we're going to get. These are the valleys in the back of Caracas. These are the hillside communities of La Vega. But this is only a little piece. But if you don't fly in a helicopter, you don't see this. Most Venezuelans who are protesting on the streets today have never been in a slum in their lives. That's a problem. Because slum dwellers work in all the houses of everyone in the formal city. So they know both cities. And they're not happy with the way cities are developing. I don't think in this way or any other way in the past either. So the city's a complex place, but the city's for people. These were our first clients. This was our old nanny, our cook, her son, her nephew, her niece, some of the kids on the streets who were friends of theirs, and they were the first ones who took us into the slums of Caracas. Today, frankly, I'll tell you, I don't think I would have been able to do the study of our book called Caracas Case. We called our book Caracas Case, a book that was done in 2003, because it was kind of playing a game on the Caracaso, El Caso Caracaso, Caracas Case. Caracaso was the first movement where the slum dwellers came down to the city in 1989 and ransacked the city. So we went back up into the slums, not acting as an architect, acting as an NGO because we had no clients. And we started to do tournaments, basketball tournaments, and soccer tournaments. And these are some of the prizes, Caracas Urban Think Tank. We created an NGO first. So architects creating an NGO as a collective. And sadly, I announced to you, not with too much drama, but the 3 kids in the middle are dead. They didn't make it through. The one in the middle was one of the biggest drug dealers in the slum. So this was our book that tried to map a new reality of how we saw Caracas. The community, the architecture community, thought we were insane. how could slums be the way? Architecture never traditionally, modern architecture was not made in slums. It was not a topic for the academia. There was no a program in universities to study these things. So our book basically tried to say that informal settlements are not the problem but the solution. Why are they solution? Because the government couldn't build housing fast enough to attend this growing population. So everyone's got a right to live in the city. Grab a piece of land. Do you know that the United States was all made by grabbing a piece of land? It was called the Oklahoma land grab. There's a famous photograph of these cowboys, all on horses, and a line was drawn in Oklahoma because it was the last piece of territory where they erased the Indians from there. It was the last, after the Continental Divide. And you see someone with a gun holding it to shoot, and you would run out into the wilderness and grab a piece of land. So that's what these slum dwellers did. Lack of any policy into the urban wilderness, they grabbed a piece of land. So you can't really call them illegal now. They've been 30, 40 years living in these houses. They have a de facto legality. They can no longer be defined by lack of urban services because the politicians came in later to put stairs, electricity, to gain votes from that population. They can no longer be defined according to precarious construction materials because what began as tin and shack and wood has become brick and concrete and permanent. They can't even be defined as free places to live because there's an economy going on. It's like a popular economy. They're renting every space and room. Finally, it's not even communities of chronic poverty. Not everyone who lives in slums is poor. So we have to think now in these geographies of segregation, in these islands and ghettos, which cities are being transformed into. Who has the right to the city? We don't serve them with infrastructure. We don't give them legality. We don't bring water to them. We want to make housing blocks to move them to because that would be the right thing to do. What's worse? I'm not really sure. At least in one case, I've got my own house, and I'm not up in the air. But also the resilience to natural disasters, because some of them are in very precarious zones that we have to attend, or man-made disasters of people diverting rivers, creating dams, right, and putting them in danger. But we want a democratic city, right, and a transparent city. What you see here is a developer who wanted a piece of land where a slum was only in wood. It was in the first stages of development. He had some people set fire to the slum in Parque Real in Sao Paulo, smack in the middle of the city. We want safe cities. This is the square where we did the first soccer tournament. And those shots on the wall, the kids put circles around them to identify at night this becomes a shooting zone, right? And a safe home so that children can grow up safe. So if you want to remember any number, think about 2, 50, 75, and 80. 2% of the globe is urbanized. We use it. It's land that we have cities built on. Of course, that includes the watery body. 50% of the urban population now lives in cities, a world population. 75% of the energy used in the world is used in cities, and about 80% of the carbon emission is coming out of cities. So we're in that last round ecology that I've been talking to you. So it's time to redefine our understanding of urbanization. Maybe not Geneva, maybe not Zurich, because we have incredible control over our size of cities and population. But what can we learn that we can tell few other cities how to build Mumbai, Delhi, Bangalore? Why are we just selling products that are outdated? So some of you might remember the Bronx in the 1970s with the oil crisis, right? Well, all of those things are market-made. So we have ecology and we have economics. Malthus and Robbins, for instance. So one says that ecology occurs in small quantities, are rare. Insufficient supply to meet demand. We have a conflict on scarcity and abundancy. Who controls where resources go, where money goes? The world definitely has enough money, but it's not going to where it needs to go to really solve the problem. We have no one who finances experimentation, but a lot of people want to finance a product once it's developed to introduce it into some kind of market, right? But who's financing the development of products? I know thousands of people who have good ideas, but they can't find anyone to finance them. So this idea of scarcity and abundancy of ideas or market or economy or food is something we have to look very closely with. We have to mess with that market. It's not a natural condition. Building and cities reflect the priorities of the economic regimes that shape them. In Caracas themselves, where the petroleum money is going, who knows? It might be in some Asian bank that we have no idea. It might be in Cuba for that matter. Because all the oil money produced with national oil money that was billions and billions of dollars, right, is now down to only $2 billion now in reserves. So this is not only happening in Latin America, but in the Caribbean. This is actually the informal sectors of Trinidad and Tobago. What's happening there? Because Venezuela's oil was nationalized, all the international companies for oil went to Trinidad, just in front. In fact, Trinidad and Venezuela were once one piece of land. In fact, Trinidad was part of Venezuela in history way back then. But you see, they're tapping into our oil lines diagonally, right? And there they have the free market to do it. But what's happening there? No housing policy, governments not paying attention, and informal cities are growing. There is enough food and water and land and energy on the planet to meet the requirements of a population. There is, and we got to figure out how to get it to where it should go. Resource allocation is the problem. This is, for instance, a slum that we're working on in Sao Paulo. This slum here, Paradise slum, right? City, is actually in the middle of the richest neighborhood of Sao Paulo, Morumbi. And all the people living here are working in those neighborhoods and at the soccer stadium of the Sao Paulo soccer stadium and all around. So cities have traditionally provided these economies of scale and proximity for public goods and services in the past. There was an idea that architects were building cities like Chandigarh to create nations. There was an idea that Haussmann was building a better Paris. But what happened to those architects today? What have we become, as some people say, have we become just decorators, right? And so here you see from the hillside communities of Caracas, a very rare view from the slum out to the city. This is a view we rarely ever see. I like to read some of this. It's important that regarding the environmental limits of growth, it can be argued that not enough is produced today to feed, to clothe, to shelter, entertain the entire world population without significant environmental degradation. What prevents this is globally unjust geography of production and consumption, with over-concentration in some favored places and spaces and scarcity in others. The persistent extremes of polarized geographical development create not so much a challenge to do something about the environment per se, but rather a political challenge to struggle for redistributive spatial justice at multiple scales. Focusing less on outcomes. So you might say that the architect now has become the social activist. The architect now is going to use his intelligence in urban strategies to shift the political awareness and mess with politics, with policy, because the city is frozen politics. Everything you see in the city about zoning was a political decision. I won't go too much into these quotes. And Jeremy Till, a good friend, says this: as soon as we understand that scarcity as a constructed condition and not an inevitable one, then it makes it possible to creatively intervene in that process and construct a new particular scarcity. Architecture spatializes and materializes uneven development. So do you guys really want to be an architect that is working to spatialize that unevenness in the world? You better think who's your client and who you're working for. Architects have been complicit in this process. And the question is it sustainable to build cities like we're doing? And, are these urban poverty situations sustainable at all? Or how can we make them sustainable? So a little play here on Venturi's book, Learning from Las Vegas. We say learning from La Vega, which is the photograph you see in the cover of the book. So we started to get into filmmaking. And this was one of our first movies, Caracas, Informal City. And I'll show just a piece of it. This is what I wanted you to see. Until I flew in that helicopter and I looked over this hillside community of Petare, I didn't believe that this was a constructed city of almost 900,000 people today. Petare Sur y Petare Norte. It's the most amazing piece of city that I've seen ever. And what's so interesting about it, we'll get into in a moment. Sorry that I'm going off on theory, but I don't think our work can be understood without all of this. So when we arrived with the mayors in Caracas, behind their wonderful desk with the maps of the city, there were these white spots. And we said, what are those white spots? There's stuff built there. And if you look carefully, it says Zona Verde. Because this is municipal mountain land, right? Until we mapped it and put it on with GIS. And we had a city that was bigger than the whole municipality that they were legislating on. And they said to us, listen, if we legally recognize that that exists, we would have to distribute our presupuesto, our income of the taxes, equally among all of those citizens. So they prefer to ignore it and just use them for political campaigning. So this is Petare on the hillside community, the highway that goes out of the city, and on the left, La Urbina. You say, how can that be formal, informal? One side of the highway, on the other side of the train tracks. Well, this was urban politics. This whole farmland was owned by a Schlageter family, had a big farm in the city. And then in the 70s, they decided to expropriate right down the middle for a highway out of the city. And it took a long time to build that highway. So all the workers were camping there as funds were coming in and out and developing. And they camped on the bottom part of that hillside community. By the time 20 years had gone by of the building of this highway, the Schlageter family, no way. Don't give that land back to me. That land is lost. Give me special zoning to compensate for the lost land on the other side of the city. And that's why you see La Urbina with a high density zoning that compensates. And so what I'm saying is what you look at, you have to analyze carefully how it was done and why it was done. And here, I'll show you another interesting example. This is a wonderful slum clearance program of 23rd of January of the 1950s in Caracas. 48 mega blocks like the ones you might see here on the sides of the river here in Geneva. Mega block social housing, right? And in the beginning, it seemed like a good idea to socially cleanse, right? We know nowadays that making blocks with one kind of class inside is actually building a ghetto like in Newark or Chicago. But in this time, well, it was Corbusian. He's at fault for giving this urban idea of these blocks standing in green fields, right? The interesting thing here, what happened was that after those blocks were built, the dictatorship fell, and people invaded the land in between the blocks. Because the blocks were built so well with so much infrastructure, baseball fields, electricity, bathrooms, churches, people actually plugged into that infrastructure. And now you had the tower and the park plugged into an urban village. So you had this mass pancake of an urban village with the towers enclave. And I liked this idea of informal formal. So this is what we discovered. The idea that the formal is necessary, and we as architects must perform that. We must create the kind of structure, formal structure, or the network, or if you want to say, the framework. And the rest should be adaptable and changeable over time, because cities are built over time. So at Columbia University, I was taught to build architecture like this. You cut hills. Here you cut the hillside. You call some good architects, OMA, Sana and other people, and you do nice bill MVRDV, and you put them all right in individual pieces of community. No real cohesion, very expensive, and then unsustainable because all of the energy that it took to move that hill, to dump it, to move it, all the gas oil used, etc., will never be recuperated in the life cycle of that community. So when we saw this, we said, wow, this is amazing. It's not perfect, of course. It's like an Italian hillside community, Greek village in quotation marks. It has roads, networks, stairs, systems, and it's the lightest possible architecture of local kind of materials that doesn't cut too much the hill. It kind of sets itself lightly, and it creates an incredible bonding between stairs and levels of topography, creating neighborhoods that are not shaped in square blocks, but with very funny shapes. So you could say, is this a mountain full of houses or one house or one building, apartment building, the size of a mountain? Because they live in a kind of cooperative, collective community. Say, of course, this is a photograph taken from Le Corbusier's one of his drawings. He had an idea of the domino house. Many of you might know it, but he also drew the domino here in his painting. I think it's interesting because we play a lot of domino in South America. No? El azar, a little bit of luck, right, and strategy. So the domino house was an incredible thing. But did you guys know that this is not new what I'm doing? I'm tying in to a whole line of thinking from the 60s, from the 20s, from the 1970s. Le Corbusier created the domino house from post-World War I housing crisis, where he left the walls out because he said, we'll just use the rubble and the rocks from the destruction of the buildings to fill in the walls. He reset the columns. He had a kind of interesting béton brut idea of a new construction system, but it was social housing. Well, we build one every day in South America. That became the way the cities in Latin America were built over time. So quite interesting hybridity between a kind of folkloric, popular kind of adaptability of local culture and an infrastructure of modernity. I don't want to abandon the idea of being a modern architect. I want to simply understand what modern means. Here you have a growing house, which is one of the, also an old term. It goes way back, but we have reappropriated it. You see on one side an unfinished house, and on the other it's finished balcony. Incredible. If we give people micro loans, they will finish the city well. So why can't we set up the city as an urbanist? In some way we determine some kind of structure and infrastructure that could be intelligent. It might be off the grid. Maybe we use systems so we don't plug into too much services, so we don't consume so many services, but we let the city grow over time. We don't need to finish 100% our buildings and our cities. So this is Oscar Genaro. He's an urban pirate. He's one of the pioneers kicked out of 23 de Enero with the slum clearance of the blocks, and he went to start Petare. Here are archive photos of him and his brother cutting the hill of Petare, banking it, and as developers creating lots on the hill, banking the hill, and then over time, turning the hill into a city. This is a process that we've simulated. Why do we simulate? Why do we do this translation? Because this translation for us, between the shack and then building the next floor, this is where we start to think about design. It's in this translation process. And on the last floor, urban agriculture, maybe solar energy, etc. And those orchids and those pots could have orchids and flowers to be sold in the market. So that growing house idea, and the idea of infrastructure that the architect must create, or maybe the framework. I take you to Torre David. Torre David is known because it was in the Venice Biennale. And we call it a kind of alternative modernism, of mutation and adaptation. It's a 45-floor building, smack in the middle of Caracas. I have a very personal connection to it. What's interesting to me is that it represents the boom of Venezuela and the bust of Venezuela. So it is a metaphor for what Caracas is all about, or Venezuela for that matter. So an architectural emblem that represents what's going on. The interesting thing is that it is not a vertical slum, like some people have wanted to coin, and I'll get into that. What the resident said, a former resident of Torre David, he said, we found a giant of 192 meters dead in the middle of the city that was unoccupied. It was a building that was a product of a bank failure in the 90s. The bank went broke, the developer died, and the building was confiscated by the government. It remained unused for 17 years, and like ants, instead of building slums on the outskirts of the city, people on a rainstorm and flooding that occurred in the Valley of Caracas every December, it happens, they needed a home to live in, and they crept into the bowels of the building like ants, and they made it a makeshift thing with tents, and then slowly they brought materials. They paid off the electrical bill. They grouped together funds, and it is exactly the process. For those of you who know Peru, if you go to the interior of Peru, Lima concentrates about 6 million, 7 million city. But the next biggest city in Peru is Arequipe or Trujillo with only 700,000 and 1 million Arequipe. So it's a big jump. Most of the countryside of Peru is built by cooperatives that do land grabs. They all put $300 together. They group themselves together. They form an association, and then with the money they've collected, they put the roads in, and then people stake out the plots of land. Right? Most of Latin America has been built in that way, or less poor Latin America. So it's kind of the same thing that's happening on the level of the city. What they saw was Torre David was vertical parcels of land. And it's not a slum at all, although El Colegio de Arquitectos, the School of Architecture, wanted to criticize the prize of even showing Torre David as an example of Venezuelan architecture, saying it was a vertical slum. How can it be a vertical slum? If you look into the UN definition of slum, it's defined by how many toilets there are. It's defined by income levels, poverty. This is a 45-floor tower of concrete smack in the middle of the city, and everyone's working and everyone's producing, and what may look like a slum, but it's not a slum. The slum's in your head. So we started to analyze those floors that were occupied, which were about 25 floors of the building. Most people worked in 1 kilometer radius around the building. In these red zones is where they occupied the building. And we started to analyze the way they moved, the way the sun and shadow formed on the building. We started to think, how do we get an elevator in there? Because what they use is the parking garage as the way to get up the building. They pay a motorcyclist $1 and he brings up materials up the ramps. And we said, wow, cool, a ramp. Can we do a building that's a ramp? That's quite interesting. We'll see at the Rolex Center if that could be repeated on vertical, right? And so we said, can we retrofit the building with not a singular infrastructure plugged into the network system producing electricity, but can we do micro system? Can the building produce urban agriculture? We started to think about new ways in which we could do parking garages that could be turned into housing in the future when we don't need the car. And you'll see more about that. The elevator, if we're going to add a new elevator, could the elevator become kind of a subway? The same way a subway goes horizontal, maybe the elevator can be public too and connect several buildings. Why not? And have different programs connected through elevator shafts. So we envisioned Torre David in a sci-fi movie that could be a kind of hub in the middle of a city that would be interconnecting, maybe even with flying drones that could be bringing things in and out of the city. Right? Because it is right next to the metro, the building too, so it's connected with the underground. We started to look at the facades, and we had a new vision of the building, producing aeolic energy on the top because there's a great east-west wind, the parking garage with food and solar, and a new elevator connected to the subway system that would cluster the buildings, and the buildings would have floors of public functions where people could go up and the street would continue. What a fantasy, right? Well, this is the way we saw the apartments actually working. Slowly they got a little bit better. And it has deficiencies, the tower. I'm not justifying the tower. I'm just interested, can we build a new one that would function like a city within a city? That's what's interesting for me, right? This is the way they first landed with tents, right? They even have a gym on one of the top floors. Right? But if you start to see, they even have haircut salons. They're producing a basketball team that plays in neighboring schools in the lobby of the bank. They have a basketball team, quite resourceful. And then slowly their aspiration is to fix up their apartment to look like any other middle-class apartment. And this is one of the more finished apartments in the building. Come on, this is not a vertical slum. The problem is, my colleagues in Caracas wouldn't dare go in this building. And they don't know what's inside. 60% of the inhabitants are women and children. And yet in Homeland, in the program, maybe some of you saw the tower, where the CIA agent is kidnapped and placed inside this tower, make it into a drug haven. That's not the case. So we made all kinds of funny comic strips to disseminate the story of the tower in different ways. And we saw the tower as a place where we could do an experiment, a laboratory for thinking about the city. We presented all of that in Venice, and well, you know the story and history. And now it's traveling around, and we made a book. It's all available on Amazon, of course, with Lars Müller, a Swiss publisher. It's going into our third print, and it's raised a lot of controversy. And we actually showed all the pictures of the research back in the tower with the community later on. And we gave them the Golden Lion for the Venice Biennale. But you might say it's crazy that I want to think about developing a city with cooperatives. But in London, you can see, I don't know if anyone can read that sign. It says, protected by occupation. The British have created a system of temporary legality where occupants are actually safeguarding the building from other occupants, right? So it's a funny system that maybe we could find some temporary use for artists, for studios, for whatever. So maybe we could really activate the empty parts of our city with new programs, and I'm thinking about Athens when I'm talking that way. So let's look at that urban toolbox. Let me take you into some of our projects, right? Diagnosing morphology. Yes, first you have to understand what you see, right? You have to think about adding infrastructure, new ways to bring accessibility into places, right? Plug-in infrastructure, stairs, electrical systems, right? So let's look at those urban prototypes, our gyms, our cable cars, our art schools, our children's schools. Let's go through the cable car first. Since we had to work in a highly toxic political environment, we said, how are we going to get our ideas heard? Well, we made a book, self-published ourselves. The cable car company from Austria, Doppelmayr, helped us out, and we made that book nice and red. And the Austrian ambassador took it to our government in Vienna conference and gave the book and put it on the table. Basically, the book tries to prove that we can build other transport systems in hillside communities. We had never even tried, but we analyzed that the Barrio de San Agustin, it's 70,000 people. It's at the entrance of Caracas. We start to look at the demographics. We start to talk with the local community leaders. We got their signatures. We did all kinds of studios, so we brought it into the university. Mappings. We did mappings that have the power to affect and change policy. And so when the government thought that they would build roads, what they thought that they would urbanize it with conventional roads, they didn't realize that they would displace, and we mapped it out, more than 30 to 40% of the inhabitants would have to be kicked out, right? And people didn't have accessibility during the rainy season. They had to walk up 39 floors on average. So we began to make stairs, special stairs that could rotate in any direction, could be built by the local community, stairs that could attach to any wall where we could put a foundation, community pedestrian bridges, but what we dreamed about was the car-free city. So we showed this map to the mayor, and it's in the book, where their road project would displace people, would cost a fortune, and we showed them all the houses that had just added a new floor and they had spent money, and they would lose all that money, and the government didn't have enough money to expropriate, and they never pay for taking things. We began to draw up what the stations could look like. We worked with our close friend Rudi Bauer, graphic designer, who's taught here in Genève at Head and in Zurich with us, and we invented what a station could look like with ramps, not even with elevators. We showed it to the community, and the community rallied with our model. You see the stations up on the hill, and we put in missing schools and housing at the bottom at the metro station, so the whole thing would be a loop. We created this map and loop like a necklace of infrastructures that would go around in a circle, very different to what was done in Medellin. It's not a gentrification process. It's a process that for the people that live there. And we finally got it on the subway map. Now with a subway ticket, you fly out over the city, you go up the city over the hillsides. It's the most interesting thing you can do in Caracas, is to have this urban experience of flying over the city, arriving at the stations. Unfortunately, the revolution has not opened up all the social spaces that are in the base of our stations, but people don't care because they're still now painting their houses and upgrading themselves. One day those places will be opened up to community development agencies. And the stations are kept impeccable, where people said that there would be shootings inside. They're used at 6 p.m, at rush hour and in the morning, incredibly well. Then we were able to put in some stations new vertical gymnasiums for exercise, libraries, markets. Attached here, you see it under construction on the side with a ramp system. So we connected the hill with a ramp system through our building and our soccer fields. And now people can get down and up in 10 minutes. It's changed radically for pregnant women on the hill, for old people on the hill, for kids that can go down to a school now in the city. And here it's a little bit of static. There you see it kind of flying through the city, up and down in the night, from one station to the other. Sorry for the bad graphics. Something happened with my keynote program. Well, enough with that. And even today, you see on the rooftop, se vende. The houses are for sale, for development. Advertising companies like Coca-Cola are renting the roofs. And you see what was in a socialist government built, right? Socialist, whatever you want. Actually, it's turning into something uncontrollable, which is kind of a popular capitalism. And what I find, and I was criticized for maybe having made the plan for this to happen, but I say the opposite. I was able to get some government funds invested into our city, because we are not building a city for the rich or for the poor or for one opposition class or one revolutionary class. We as architects are building one city, one connected city. And what was the worst part of the city is now the most exciting part of the city. Now, in that story, you do get caught in the crossfire, and that's why I'm going to tell you what a 21st century architect should be, and he should be a social activist, because I wanted to continue with all of the buildings that were missing as infrastructures in the bottom of our loop, right, that came as a second phase, are these buildings that you see on the screen in the Avenida Lecuna. Well, we were able to convince the metro company that in all the parcels of land that they had used to build the metro station, we analyzed them, what zoning could go in there, police stations, new housing, schools, etc. We were given 2 months to come up with an idea. We drew with 40 people that I was able to assemble, some volunteers, some not, some interns. We drew all of the designs for those projects with innovative structures, buildings that could connect to hillside communities, apartments, blocks that would function like vertical villages with public areas in between. Imagining this, as you see, is kind of the apartment zones and the public zones in the building. And here you see one of those buildings that wanted to be realized with a bridge over the metro stop that would connect over La Avenida Lecuna to little sports courts on the metro. I saw a hybrid city that was all interconnected. But of course, what happened was I was also building vertical gyms for the opposition party. And the metro company, although it's existed for 30 years, and it was supposedly a neutral agency on infrastructure, it was highly politicized. And I was never able to see my designs realized. As the columns were coming out of the ground, the government said, if you're building for the opposition also, you cannot come back on site. I had to pay 40 employees all pensions that we owed them. We never got paid the remaining payments for all of those buildings, and the buildings were built but completely transformed. It actually is kind of Elio Otisica art project, because what came out is really funny. It's like an Archimboldo, of a kind of Renaissance with fruits and things face, right? But the vertical gym has its origin in what I call street vendor architecture, working for the church. We were in Petare at the ground. We put up a little paragua, a little street vending umbrella, and a priest came up to us and said, "Can you find me a place to put an orphanage for street children?" And we said, "Yeah, put it under the bridge." He said, "What? Build it under the bridge?" He said, "Yeah, by the time the government finds out, it'll be 2 or 3 years, you'll have it. Just build it with whatever material you find." He said, "Really? Can you draw that up for me?" He said, "Yeah. If not, all the slums are going to build under that area, so take that land." So here you see the bridge. And we came back a year later, and he had built the center, and it's in Petare, and now there's actually a shopping mall right next to it, the Sambil, in Petare, because the shopping mall development company also realized that this is a market. And the bridge, under part of the bridge, is the roof to the soccer pitch, right, and the basketball court. And we created on top of the children's home, we created a workshop. And this is Jose Antonio Nunez from my office teaching the kids how to build a chair. So we do far more than just create the buildings. We're interested in the whole holistic cycle of architecture. And these are all the gyms that we've prototypes we've created over time. Because the gym wants to be a generic product that could be built anywhere in the world, open source, and it can be adapted to any. So we give it to anyone here in the room who wants one, wants to build one. And all you need is a space like this that is utilized by only 6-on-6 playing. Often in Brazil, especially in Caracas, the drug dealers don't let the little kids use it, or after school. kids use it. And so we said to the mayor, let's verticalize it. Let's turn it into a real community center. We made a steel prototype. It can be built in 3 months. And what we turned it into was a fabulous community center where now it has 4,000 square meters of sports activity running track inside. It is a patented, let's say, or intellectual property building, but it's open source to those who respect the design. And here you see Enrique Capriles, who hired us. He's the opposition candidate that almost beat Chavez when he was alive, and he's leading the opposition now, speaking at one of our projects. This is the Baruta gym, and here you see it under construction, and it was just inaugurated a few weeks ago. And this is one that we did for Ocariz in Petare, in the Miranda, another opposition mayor, where we put a little street vendors market underneath and the gym on top that connects. And this is what the gym kind of looks like. You can build the gym in pieces, so you don't have to build it all at once if you don't have the funds. But the idea to verticalize sports for places that don't have enough sports fields. If we calculate, there's a human rights to give people enough schools, public parks, green places, sports places in these urbanizations, if we treat them as normal legislated urbanization. So we have a right to give back as mayors and as governors and as presidents. And I'm happy to say that we're only 6 on 6 played. Now we have repeated users up to 15,000 per month using the gym. Any museum would be happy. And at the beginning, the mayor said to us, Chico, ¿tú crees que en verdad hay una necesidad de hacer más? There's a necessity to build more sports. Well, he didn't know that it would be a market. So this is another one, which is our cities are full of children with problems because of the very environment where they're growing up. So if you look at our work is dedicated to infrastructures, mobility giving the right to people to access the city. Our work is also geared towards sports, health, and education. We basically do only public buildings. Now that makes it very hard because we're working with mayors in conflict zones that have no money and no resources. But let's look at this case of the Children's School for Autistic Children. Well, we were given a municipal piece of land where there was a park, if you see it there. And we said, there's no way we're going to cut down trees. We're not going to encroach into the park area. That's a beautiful place for the kids to run and go out, right? And so we verticalized the school on a small piece of land. And we were so happy that we were doing that. Then we went to Higashi Organization for Autistic Children in Boston, and there's one in Tokyo. And they said, no way. Autistic children cannot walk upstairs. They can't even go up in elevators. They get claustrophobic. You can't make an autistic children's vertical. Say, well, I'm sorry, we're not going to spread it out. Because if we spread it out along the territory, we think that's an ecocide. So we figured out that if we made the building a complete ramp, like the Guggenheim, the kids would get exercise. As they went up, they would be able to look into the classrooms and not be claustrophobic about where they're going with apprehension. And they would go up to the top where they get exercise and walk back down. And then they would be also in touch with air, light, and looking out into the green fields. And we were able to realize it. And today, it's an absolutely new model of training autistic children. People from all over the world are coming to see how the kids are doing as they walk up. It's a total success for and the children look into the different classrooms. They arrive up top where they get special training, and so much for that. And we hope to repeat those. And you'll see that once one client has paid for a building, we offer it out to anyone who wants it. So here's the other idea. Music schools, art schools. We think that art can be real therapeutic for these conflict zones, right? So we thought about a music school. Many of you might know the youth orchestra, famous youth orchestra that was created in Venezuela. Now its much esteemed director is a brilliant musician, Gustavo Dudamel, leading the Los Angeles Philharmonic, but he's a moral midget, because he's not taking a stand on the particular government and what's going on. In fact, the same day of the riots with students being killed, he was playing a concert for Maduro, the illegitimate president. But we developed the idea of putting music schools all over the slums of Caracas, because music is transformative. If a kid brings a violin into a home, it transforms the home itself. So we would popularize bring music to the masses. Because Venezuela is in such a conflict zone, because Gustavo and El Sistema became so polarized, we went to Sao Paulo to make it. And in Sao Paulo, we were able to get receptivity. We thought about these network of these centers all together, and they said, well, what can you do here in this site in Paraísopolis, in the middle of Paradise City, right? It was pretty bad. No infrastructure. You couldn't even access it. So we said we would use the hillside to make an outdoor amphitheater, to recuperate water, to make a park, and the building would be connected with bridges, so the building and the park would work together, and we would put a bus station and a whole transport hub. This won the Wholesome Prize. Some of you know the Swiss company, Wholesome Prize for Sustainability. It works off the grid, 40% radiant cooling, solar energy. It's very cheap. It's like just what I told you. It's a simple structure or framework that gets filled in. The theaters at the top and the studios for teaching are at the bottom. And the bottom is a soccer pitch or a music amphitheater or a market square during the day. So buildings that have multiple possibilities. And we also designed the Central Music School in Caracas. I don't think it'll get realized, with 3 theaters and a school above for these music schools that would be spread out all around the city. But now we're working with IDB. If this is getting too long, just someone let me know. And I just want to take you into how you can force an international organization. And now we've plugged in and created with an IDB and ETH, we've done an MOU where we're going to look at sustainable emerging cities in Latin America. Secondary cities, ones that are 1 million and smaller, right? This was in Port of Spain. We looked at the Dry River, and we made the Dry River, the whole urban project became a park that would sew together the two sides. This is already asking for funding to create this park. But we also saw an old abandoned parking garage that was turned into an emergency center for homeless. And we said, what a great idea. Could we use the generic, cheap parking structures that everyone all over the world knows how to build, concrete, steel, whatever, since we won't need cars? Can we kind of transform them into these fabulous centers of anything? Maybe it's you park your car now, you have an office, you have a house, you don't. A complete mix of a building that would change over time, and maybe you have your electrical scooter, we won't have a car, and the building would function and change. Well, yes, it's a perfect generic type. And guess what? It works on ramps. It's a continuous thing. You can bring up your scooter or you can walk up. It's like a hill, right? So why did we think it would work? Because we saw it in Caracas. Already here, you see in Caracas parking garages being changed into offices, and we saw it also in Jakarta. We saw the tops of parking garages turning into housing. But we saw it here again in Caracas, and we said, wow, urban agriculture in a parking garage. Well, actually, it's not so true. That all that green agriculture is because the promoter and owner of that parking garage is actually making shops inside and wants to cover it to the municipality. Well, we also are doing with the IDB a radical new idea, which is a civic center for Mar del Plata. Mar del Plata being the vacation spot in Argentina where actually Che Guevara's family went in its time. And Mar del Plata needs a new civic center. Well, the truth is the civic center is down in the old city, but we told the mayor 30% of your voting population is poor and lives on the outskirts in terrible conditions. Let's move where that red dot is. Let's move your mayor's office and make a new civic center, and it would raise the land values, transform the city. You would be in communication with your voting population, and let's leave the downtown civic center as an art and cultural place. So yes, we said, and buy up this land that was available and keep it all as one big chunk of land to really create an impact in the city. But we had to make the cheapest building, again, an infrastructure building, 2 bars, the bars and maybe a landscape, right? And I'm just going to take you very quickly. The bars would have accessibility. It would be a building that would have no doors. You could access it from below, come up into the offices. It would be a building that would not be tall, vertical, but actually horizontal. It would connect all of the agencies at a municipality work together with bridges. And it could be cheap infrastructure with passive cooling, etc. Here are all the departments. This is the idea of that civic center, how it would look on the inside. And unfortunately, they changed the mayor on me. We'll see what happens. Finally, last project of the night is the Empower Shack. The Empower Shack is an exhibition that's going on right now in Zurich. It'll be up for 5 weeks. It is Brillembourg Klumpner, a project on South Africa at the Gallery Eva Prenzenhuber, gallery in the Lowenbrau Areal, which is an old brick building where the Kunsthalle is, where all the good galleries are. And I'll take you through that. I think it's important, and I'll leave you at this small-scale idea, because it's one of our tools is to do small-scale interventions that could iterate, like the gym that could iterate, right? If we don't do something with Kailish, which is what you see here, which is on the townships on the flats of Cape Town, or Soweto, or Marlborough, we're going to have a huge problem in South Africa. Now, of course, you know Mandela and the Freedom Charter are very important. Mandela's gone, so maybe it's fitting that we celebrate Mandela today. He said there should be houses and security and comfort for all. You know the apartheid urbanism was segregated islands of poverty, and most of these shacks are so badly built that when a kerosene lamp falls over, they burn down entire neighborhoods. So the first thing is to analyze that topography, like in Caracas. I show you how we can look at different places around the world. This is BT Settlement. We're working with an NGO called Ikailami. Anyone who wants to contribute, please just contact us. The 60 houses are informal, and they actually have very bad use of the space that they occupy, for 57% built, unbuilt. And we said maybe with a computer app, we can reorganize them, we can shuffle them around, create roads, bring in infrastructure, build better houses. And we said, why not go vertical? We saw it in Mumbai. They can become entrepreneurs. They can build their house up. You've heard that story of the growing house. But who's going to pay for that? Well, maybe we can put solar panels on. They can have a feed-in tariff. Maybe we can build them in clusters altogether. Maybe over time they can pay into the system and have a little rent. But then we found one shack that went up 2 floors. We said, voila, that was the moment. Very simple idea, right, going up. And so we started to analyze the shacks that were there. We created 3 types. We clustered those types, and we made little courtyards for the clustering so people could have laundries, they could wash, they could come out and talk to each other and share resources. This is the whole scheme where the house here below feeds into the system. South Africa is still a carbon-based burning coal, right? The clusters, the system, a kit of parts again, prefabricate, use solar energy, and we brought the community leader to Switzerland. Pumezo, he had never even left his village. He flew to Sweden. There he is giving us a lecture on how they build, and we worked with him on the prototype. We see an idea of that this would transform the whole neighborhood. We've produced a catalog now. I hope you guys all get a hold of. It's also on Facebook, Urban Think Tank. You can download the PDF about articles about Africa. We analyzed the existing structures, the materials, and we thought maybe we can make a kind of core unit where we have the bathroom, the water tank, the stair that goes up, the doors and everything comes right, and then the shacks plug into it. We can iterate those clusters around that core unit, and we actually decided to take money out of our pocket, everyone in the office, and build one. And just to prove the point, if things remain academia, we're not doing anything. Just to prove it. So this is Pumezo after his trip back from Switzerland. He's very proud. We promised him a house, and there he got his new house. He's the owner of the first Empower Shack. And everyone is coming to visit him. We hope to refine that prototype, but we need research money, that would work, so we can build the other 60 houses and really transform this into a solar field, right? We need you guys. So whoever wants to adopt a shack, let me know. The gallery show that shows the prototypes, the core unit, but we analyze the whole idea of a shack in a gallery from every point of view, from photographs to paintings to walls, to all done by our collective urban think tank. So we work in merging the kind of on the fringes where architecture meets other disciplines and our little shack model. And we want you. And maybe I leave you with the idea that maybe we can build a different kind of city all collectively. And I'll open up for questions if anyone does have questions. We'll leave this running. But you'll see our group of office and students and everyone building a hypothetical city that is built all together with no plan. Maybe I'll turn it down and read you something, maybe as a conclusion. It might be nice. So the house is often cited as a metaphor for the city. And think about the shack. The city as a metaphor for the entire planet. We believe the identification of simplicity within a complex urban form has led us at the beginning of the 21st century to develop the concept of an urban planet. The idea embodied in this concept is that of a modern macropolis, or one of globally connected city. If we accept the idea that we are all unified in this urban planet, then we can release development on the basis of our built city ecology of together. The project for an ongoing process of urbanization can be seen in two ways. On the one hand, the model of the global city, and maybe that's the market for metropolises like London, New York, and Tokyo, and on the other hand, the slums for cities like Caracas, Sao Paulo, and Lagos. And what I want to do is these two have to start to work together. So the global metropolises are in the process of linking up Europe, of course, as hotspots, not just physically with buildings, transport, and power lines, but virtually too through the internet by means of radio, mobile phones, economic and cultural networks. But for the first time in history, man does not have to live in a city to have an urban lifestyle. And what we're actually thinking about reaching out to these new ideas is what's the new urban lifestyle for the 21st century. I don't want a city for my grandfather. I want a city that the children today who are 5 and 6 will want to live in, right? In this case, these three megatrends of urbanization, globalization, and informalization have helped spread these islands and ghettos. However, the resilience and potential of finding these new strategies in these informal zones are a super motor for invention and experimentation, and has aroused my imagination, as I hope it arouses yours. And what's lacking, in my opinion, is a kind to link these bottom-up and top-down ideas. So, in a way, if you think the Torre David is kind of a an object that's scandalous. Just think of Marcel Duchamp when he put the urinal into the museum. He raised the question, what is art? In that way, we put the Torre David into the Biennale and asked the question, what is architecture for the 21st century? Thank you.